A 19-year-old black teen walks into court alone. No lawyer, no backup. Everyone laughs until he exposes the lies, flips the courtroom, and makes a corrupt system shake. Under the harsh white glow of the fluorescent lights in the Oakland City Courthouse, the air felt thick, almost unbreathable. The gallery seats were packed, yet no one dared to speak above a whisper, like they feared breaking the fragile tension draped across the courtroom. Malik Carter, 19 years old, stood silently at the defendant's table. He wore a crisp white dress shirt, collar neatly buttoned, hands resting at his sides against black slacks. No private attorney, no family seated nearby. Just his eyes, steady, unwavering, locked straight ahead on the man reclining behind the judge's bench, Judge Marcus Everett. Judge Everett tapped his fingers lazily on the oak desk, eyes skimming the case file with the casual boredom of someone reviewing a menu before lunch. Grand theft auto, resisting arrest. You think this is some kind of game, Carter? A few quiet snickers rose from the prosecution's side. Prosecutor Richard Langford made no effort to hide his disdain. With one hand in his tailored blazer pocket, he tilted his head, watching Malik the way a teacher watches a student moments before handing out a failing grade. Malik didn't respond. He swallowed the heat rising in his throat. This moment hadn't been prepared over a few days, but over years. While other kids memorized multiplication tables, Malik had studied case law. While his friends played video games, he practiced cross-examinations on mock trial transcripts. Everett pushed his glasses higher on his nose and flipped to another page in the file, scoffing. This is a courtroom, not a high school debate club, Malik. I'd like to wrap this up before 2. I have a tea time. Another ripple of laughter swept the courtroom. But this time Malik's lips curled just slightly, because he knew right then Judge Everett had made his first mistake. He raised his head, eyes calm but resolute. This wasn't just a trial. This was his proving ground. They had picked the wrong kid. And Malik Carter hadn't come here to bow his head. Judge Everett leaned back, gaze fixed on Malik. The corner of his mouth curled into a smirk with no effort to conceal the contempt behind it. I hear you're planning to represent yourself? He asked, dripping with mockery. Well then, looks like we got ourselves a hallway lawyer. Laughter burst again from the prosecution's benches. Richard Langford, the seasoned DA, wasted no time jumping in. If he knows the law half as well as he knows how to make trouble, he chuckled to the court clerk, I might need to go on vacation. Malik didn't flinch. He was used to those looks, the kind that adults gave kids like him, black kids, as if waiting for the inevitable misstep just to say, see? I told you so. We got eyewitnesses' fingerprints and a vehicle reported stolen. Langford continued smugly. And now the defendant wants to turn this trial into a, what? Lecture on conspiracy theory. The courtroom laughed again, but Malik stood motionless. One hand slid into his pocket, the other gripping a neatly stacked folder of documents. In his mind, every detail had already been connected. Each exchange, every inconsistency in witness statements, every procedural gap left open. Judge Everett shook his head, almost amused by a performance he believed was about to unfold. All right, Mr. Carter. I don't often see young men this confident in their own stupidity. But if you want to represent yourself, be my guest. The air tightened. Malik stepped forward, each footfall a quiet declaration. I didn't come here to be a punchline. I came to prove something. Before we proceed, Your Honor, Malik said calmly, I'd like to clarify a few points from the prosecution's statement. Langford crossed his arms, eyes narrowing with challenge. Go ahead, Counselor Jr. Malik gave a slight nod, like someone stepping into a room he'd memorized long ago, back when he sat at the dinner table listening to his mother recount court stories. Prejudice might be loud, but preparation and truth were louder. The courtroom held its breath as Malik placed his folder on the defense table and lifted his gaze directly toward Judge Everett. Your Honor, I confirm that I will be representing myself, he said, voice steady, clear, and unwavering. Another ripple of murmurs swept through the courtroom. A few people chuckled. Others turned to each other with skeptical glances. Prosecutor Langford snorted, shaking his head with exaggerated disappointment. Well, this will be a rare show, he mocked. What's next? quoting TikToks about the Constitution. Malik didn't respond. He flipped to a marked page in his file, his eyes locked in, unshaken by the ridicule. Straightening up, he walked to the center of the room, the same spot where real lawyers made their arguments. "Your Honor," Malik began, before the prosecution continues, "I respectfully request clarification on a fundamental point in the indictment. Specifically, the time at which I was allegedly caught behind the wheel of the stolen Audi A6. Everett squinted. "Go on. I'm listening." "The report states I was arrested at the intersection of Fremont and 9th Street at exactly 8:47 p.m., but according to surveillance footage I obtained from the nearby 7-Eleven, Malik continued calmly, the vehicle in question was abandoned at least 15 minutes earlier. The courtroom froze. Langford stiffened, frowning. "Your Honor, I haven't received any such." "And I'm submitting a copy now," Malik interrupted, holding up a crisp printout with a timestamp. "The footage shows me leaving the 7-Eleven carrying a bag of snacks, nearly 4 blocks away from where the car was abandoned." Langford's mouth fell open. For the first time that day, no one in the courtroom was laughing. A few heads turned, eyebrows raised. Malik didn't pause. "And that's just the beginning." Judge Everett raised an eyebrow. The derision in his gaze had started to fade, replaced by something else. Scrutiny. The balance had begun to shift. And for the first time since the trial began, the name Malik Carter was no longer met with laughter. Malik took another step toward the center of the courtroom. His voice wasn't loud, but each word landed like a blade stripping away layers of pretense from the prosecution's case. "Your Honor," he said, turning to face Prosecutor Langford, "in the indictment, the prosecution relies on the testimony of Officer Stephen Hunt, who allegedly witnessed me inside the stolen vehicle and made the arrest." Langford nodded, trying to hide the tension in his face. "That's correct. His statement was submitted with the case report." Malik nodded slowly. "I don't deny that, but with the court's permission, I'd like to submit evidence showing that Officer Hunt's testimony is false." The courtroom fell deathly silent. Malik turned toward Judge Everett. "Your Honor, I requested GPS tracking data from the Los Angeles Police Department's internal vehicle monitoring system, specifically for Patrol Unit 647, operated by Officer Hunt on the night in question." He held up another document, this time showing a detailed location report. "According to this data, from 8:30 to 8:55 p.m., the time frame of the alleged incident, Officer Hunt's vehicle never left the vicinity of a gas station nearly 2 miles from the reported crime scene." A low murmur rippled through the audience. Someone in the back let out an audible, "Oh." "Not only that," Malik continued, flipping to the next page, "but the electronic time log shows that Officer Hunt didn't even arrive near the scene until 9:03 p.m., after I'd already been arrested and the car had been towed." Langford shot up from his seat. "Objection. These documents are verified from the police department's internal system." Malik cut in smoothly, never breaking eye contact. "I submitted copies to the public defender's office several days ago and received confirmation of delivery." Judge Everett leaned forward, peering down at the documents. His expression began to shift. He didn't say a word, but the rhythmic tapping of his pen stopped cold. Malik turned to face the jury. "So, if the prosecution's key witness wasn't even present at the scene and his statement contradicts the objective data, then I ask you, what is the truth and what is simply what they want you to believe?" Silence followed, but the certainty in the room, once firmly on the side of the state, was beginning to waver. Standing tall with the report still in hand, Malik's gaze moved deliberately from one juror to the next. He was no longer just a 19-year-old standing in a courtroom surrounded by prejudice. He was someone who knew exactly what he was doing, and where the cracks were in the system so many took for granted. "Now, let's talk about the fingerprints," he said, his voice calm but sharp as a scalpel. "The prosecution claims that my fingerprint on the steering wheel is irrefutable evidence. But I ask you, is a single print enough to establish guilt?" Some jurors furrowed their brows. Others leaned forward in their seats. "Ladies and gentlemen," Malik continued, "if you walked into a store today, tried on a jacket, slipped your hand into the pocket, and left your fingerprint inside, does that make you a thief if the jacket goes missing later?" A few jurors nodded slightly. A middle-aged woman pursed her lips, shifting her gaze from Malik to Prosecutor Langford. "Yes, I touched that car," Malik admitted, not flinching. "It was parked outside the 7-Eleven that night. I walked past it with 2 friends. The door was unlocked. I was curious. I opened it, looked inside. I didn't drive it. I didn't move it. I didn't take anything. Just a brief, impulsive moment of curiosity, like so many young people have." He turned to look at Judge Everett, then at the prosecutor. "What they want you to believe is that touch equals intent to steal. But that's not how real law works. If a single fingerprint is enough to convict, how many people in this room could be sitting where I am without even knowing it?" The courtroom had quieted again, this time not out of ridicule, but reflection. "And one more thing," Malik said, his voice dropping just slightly. "The fingerprint analyst, the person who processed the sample, is not present here today. I haven't been given the opportunity to question them about the procedure, about the condition of the surface, or about any potential for error. We are being asked to accept a piece of evidence without any way to verify it." No one objected. Malik nodded slowly, as if drawing his own conclusion. They have evidence, but not the truth. The courtroom went still after that quiet, decisive statement. Malik didn't need to raise his voice. He had forced everyone to confront the idea of irrefutable evidence in a new light. Prosecutor Langford flipped through his files, clearly searching for something to push back with. But it was obvious he was no longer in control. Malik didn't let the silence go to waste. He stepped forward toward the center of the room, his tone still measured and calm, but now his gaze was sharp, unyielding. "And now," he continued, "I have a question for the prosecution." He turned to face Langford directly. "The forensic technician, the one who handled the fingerprint sample from the vehicle, where is that individual today? Why weren't they called to testify?" Langford looked up, trying to mask his discomfort. "We didn't deem it necessary. The report is thorough enough." "Not necessary," Malik repeated, carefully emphasizing every syllable. "So you intend to build a criminal case on a sheet of paper, but refuse to bring the person who wrote it into court to answer a single question?" Some of the jurors exchanged glances. An older man frowned deeply. A young woman shook her head slowly. Malik turned back toward them. "I haven't been allowed to ask about the surface conditions. Was the vehicle dusty? Could there have been cross-contamination? Were gloves used when collecting the sample? Who verified the chain of custody? We don't know. And more importantly, they don't want us to know." Langford began to rise, but sat back down halfway through. The rebuttal died before it left his mouth. Malik concluded, his voice slower now, and waited. "In a criminal courtroom, a person's life, future, and dignity are placed on the scales of justice. And those scales should never tilt simply because the prosecution was lazy." The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was heavy. From the bench, Judge Everett tapped his gavel lightly, but the arrogance from earlier in the hearing had drained from his face. His expression now was contemplative, as though, for the first time, he was truly listening. Malik returned to his seat. He didn't smirk. He didn't lean back. He simply sat. But everyone in that room understood. From that moment on, the ground had shifted. Every eye in the courtroom remained fixed on Malik Carter as he slowly rose once more. There was no hesitation in his posture now, no trace of doubt. His voice carried a new gravity, not the voice of defendant, but of someone who had been forced to speak up because the truth had been buried for too long. "Your Honor," Malik began, pulling a clearly printed sheet of paper from his folder, "I'd like to present the original witness statement from Mr. Thomas Weller, the lawful owner of the Audi A6. The entire courtroom froze in a collective breath. Prosecutor Langford looked up sharply, his expression darkening. Malik held the statement up for all to see, then read aloud. "I left the vehicle about 3 minutes before it was stolen. I saw a young white male, approximately 5 feet 10 inches, brown hair, wearing a gray hoodie, running from the gas station and driving off." He paused, eyes sweeping the room. "Did everyone hear that clearly?" He said louder, more firmly. "A white male." The silence that followed was thunderous. One juror's mouth fell open. Another looked down at their notes. then slowly turned toward Langford with growing doubt in their eyes. "Your Honor," Malik continued, "I am not 5 feet 10 inches. I don't have brown hair. And clearly I am not white." Langford shot up. "Objection, Your Honor. That statement is not in the official record. It lacks credibility." Malik cut in, his voice sharp for the first time during the trial, because the prosecution deliberately omitted it. The room erupted. A gasp broke from the audience. A reporter in the back furiously scribbled down every word. And then it happened. From the front row, an older man stood up. He wore a leather jacket, his silver hair catching the light, a folder in hand. "My name is Thomas Weller," he said, voice deep and unwavering. "And he's telling the truth. That is my statement. I handed it to the responding officer that very night, and I never saw it again." The air all but exploded. Langford went pale. Judge Everett leaned forward, rifling through the case file on his bench, only to find no trace of the statement. Malik didn't smile. He simply nodded to Mr. Weller, then turned back to the jury. "The truth doesn't need to shout," he said quietly. "It just needs permission to exist." And for the first time since the trial began, the scales of justice tipped decisively, not toward the bench, not toward the prosecution, but toward the 19-year-old standing in the center of the courtroom, unarmed except for a mind sharper than any legal team. Malik Carter turned back to the jury, and his voice no longer sounded like a defense. It rang like an indictment of the entire system. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his gaze settling on each face still stunned by Mr. Weller's testimony. "If I hadn't stood here today, if I hadn't defended myself, what would have happened?" He pointed to himself. "I would have been convicted, taken away, branded as guilty. Why?" Malik paused, his voice dropping lower. "Because I'm a young black man who happened to be near the scene." No one spoke. No sarcastic laughter. Not even a cough. Just silence. Because everyone knew he was right. "Physical evidence," he said, turning his palm upward. "A fingerprint. And the prosecution didn't even bother calling a forensic expert. Eyewitness." His voice sharpened. "An officer who lied, who wasn't even at the scene. Victim testimony." Malik held up the statement. "Left out a record." Then he turned toward Judge Everett. "Your Honor, if justice is built on assumptions, then every person of color near a crime scene becomes a suspect. And if the law allows that, then it is no longer justice." Judge Everett remained still. The man who had once presided over quick, unquestioned verdicts now sat in silence. He looked at Malik, not like a judge sizing a defendant, but like someone facing a mirror reflecting truths long ignored. At the prosecution table, Langford had nothing left. The file trembled slightly in his hands. A few jurors had set down their pens. One shook their head. Another closed their eyes, as if trying to unsee everything they had just witnessed. Finally, the judge spoke, his voice low, slow, and heavy with the weight of what had just unraveled before him. "This court dismisses all charges against Malik Carter." The gavel fell like thunder, cracking open the shell of bias that had hung over the courtroom all morning. A few people in the gallery burst into tears. There was applause, but it quickly faded, because they knew this wasn't luck. It was intellect underestimated, and truth buried too deep for too long. Malik didn't bow his head. He stood tall, calmly stepping away from the defense table, as if he had just passed a final exam, not to graduate, but to force an entire system to rethink how it sees him and others like him. The courtroom air remained thick as Malik descended from the defendant's stand. But this time, the eyes that followed him weren't filled with doubt or prejudice. They carried the quiet weight of acknowledgement. He hadn't won by chance. He had won through clarity, resolve, and truth. Judge Everett slowly removed his glasses and set them on the bench. He leaned forward and looked at Malik for a long time, no longer with contempt, no longer with condescension, only silence and respect. "Malik Carter," the judge called, his voice lower than usual. Malik stopped and turned back. Everett took a breath, then spoke, not with judgment, but with something that sounded almost like respect. "You've done something that very few people your age are capable of doing," he said slowly. "You didn't just defend yourself. You force an entire system to take a long, hard look at itself. At the prosecution table, Langford kept his head down, silent. Around the jury box, one by one, jurors began quietly gathering their notes. None dared speak. Everett continued, I presided over thousands of cases in my career, and to be honest, I thought this was just another routine one. But today, you reminded me that the most dangerous thing in our justice system isn't a lack of laws. It's a lack of humility. The courtroom was silent. Malik stood still, saying nothing, but the look in his eyes, calm, steady, said everything that needed to be said. Have you ever thought about studying law? Everett asked suddenly. Malik let out a soft exhale, a faint smile tugging at his lips. I've been thinking about it since I was 14. Everett nodded, as if he was only now beginning to believe it. Then do it, Carter. Because of the seat, he tapped the bench gently. Might need someone like you one day. A quiet murmur rippled through the courtroom, but Malik didn't respond with bravado. He gave a small, solemn nod, not out of pride, but as if making a silent promise. The courtroom doors swung open. Outside, the media waited, but Malik didn't stride out in triumph. He stepped out the same way he had stepped in, a young black man, armed with nothing but sharp intellect and a heart that never forgot what justice truly means. The late afternoon sun cast long golden beams across the stone steps of the Oakland City Courthouse. Malik Carter emerged through the heavy wooden doors. No cheers, no fists in the air, just a quiet, unwavering stride that reflected the same composure he had shown standing before an entire system built to doubt him. Reporters swarmed with cameras, microphones, and rapid-fire questions. But Malik's eyes were set on one thing. Far across the plaza, beneath a row of palm trees, stood his mother, Angela Carter. Her eyes were rimmed red, but they shone with pride. She didn't say a word, just opened her arms. Malik embraced her. It was a hug that didn't need explanation, as if 2 generations were finally breathing out a truth they'd never dared to fully believe, that justice had actually been served. You did it, she whispered. Not yet, Mom, Malik replied softly. This is just beginning. He turned back and looked at the courthouse behind him, a building that once symbolized powerlessness and oppression. Now, it bore the quiet mark of a 19-year-old who had once been deemed not enough. Not old enough, not white enough, not powerful enough to speak the truth. But he had spoken, and they were forced to listen. News outlets picked up the story. Social media exploded. Legal forums launched heated debates. Not because Malik was the first person to be wrongfully accused, but because he made a system, one long thought to be ironclad, admit that was wrong. And more than anything, he hadn't needed to scream for attention. He hadn't needed to step on anyone to be heard. Malik only needed preparation, conviction, and a reason not to back down. That night, in a small corner of his worn-out bedroom, Malik opened his laptop and began searching for scholarships in law. The first line he typed into his personal statement read, I want to become the voice for those who were never given a right to be heard. Because now, more than anyone, he understood, unchecked power leads to abuse. And sometimes, all it takes is one person brave enough to stand up, to make an entire system take a step back.